Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. That's really good. Thank you for that.
Thanks. I just thought, it's such a beautiful film. And I know there's a genesis to it, but the genesis may have been 50 years. Yeah. I mean, but there's an element of it. Is there an element when you first touch upon this in Catch Me If You Can?
Yeah, there were a lot of different elements in terms of other films I made that had to do with divorce, and not because of my own experience, my sisters as well, with our parents getting a divorce, but because some of the subject matter attracted me because of the divorce, what happened with Leo DiCaprio and what happened with Frank Abagnale Jr., that sort of announcement that the parents were separating and he was on his own. That was already baked into the real true story, but it grabbed me.
Do you think now at your age, and in a sense we tend to maybe wait till the closest to us are gone before we could really tackle the subject matter for yourself?
With so many of my friends have lost their parents as we move into these years, and when that happens, you realize for the first time, which you never realized before, that you're an orphan. You get orphaned when you become an orphan.
Yes.
You completely become an orphan, and it's something that, as anybody here has already experienced, it goes to the marrow of all of us. It is something that you don't think about, you don't anticipate it, and when it happens, it's a real feeling of loss and abandonment, not just loss, but abandonment. And yet my mom was very inspirational for me because she had always wanted me to tell the story. She knew all the stories. We had this secret, my mom and I had for a long time. And my mom would always say to me, "Gee, Steve, this would make a really terrific movie. Why don't you make that a movie someday?" So I had her coming at me from one side, and then Tony Kushner, who co-authored this with me, and we've been working together, for many, many years, about 20 years now. He heard a lot of the stories too, and he was also kind of pushing it. So I think I needed to wait, until I felt that feeling of loss and loneliness before I could really get serious about this.
The thing about it too is when you become the orphan, and you become the family.
Yeah.
You become the parent, in a sense. Even if you have no children, you're that entity, so to speak, and we have to accept it.
And my kids had both their grandparents, they take a lot of the weight off your shoulders. Yeah. They are involved with every single event.
Your grandparents?
The grandparents. My mom and dad were involved in everything, so it's kind of like, hey, you're making my life easy. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. The kids want to go to you more because you gift them things, and I don't as much as they do. So they go running to the grandparents. What do you got for me? And then suddenly it is true. Even though my kids are grown and out of the house, you suddenly realize that you've got even a bigger responsibility.
Yeah, it's us. Yeah, that's it.
That's all it is.
And but the beauty of the picture for me, I love the scenes between Mitzi and Sammy, and the special bond between the two of them, and particularly how the picture takes off at times, starting with the scene in which she dances in the light, the headlights, and there's a great shot of the camera flying, and he says, General Electric, the camera flies right into the headlights, and the lights go on, and she comes on, and she allows whatever she had. There's a bottle there that she was drinking or something, but whatever it is, she allows the muse just to take over, and she kind of lets go. I always felt that, watching the picture a couple of times, I always felt that the special language is art between Mitzi and Sammy. There's no doubt. And maybe that's what this bond is, that's why it's so strong.
They share a lot in common. I shared so much in common with my mom, but even more so in the way when you tell a story, everything has to become, condensed in order for timelines have to be altered in order to get the whole story out. Yeah. And in real life, some of these events were separated by months, a couple by years, and in the movie it doesn't seem that way. Yeah. It seems like it's coming fast and furious, but my mom understood. She identified with me. I identified with her because I wanted to be a movie director even as a kid with 8mm. And my mom wanted to be a concert pianist. And my mom knew that wasn't going to happen. She was also madly in love with my dad's best friend and business partner. And she didn't know if that would ever happen. So she had a kind of, she sort of vicariously lived through my dream fulfillment, wanting to be a director, when she knew she probably would never be able to be with my father's best friend and her best friend, and she knew she would never be able to perform professionally as a concert pianist. So she kind of really pushed me in that sense. She was sort of living through me. And I was living through her too, because she sucked all the air out of the room. She had the great, I don't know if you ever been to a restaurant when she was alive in LA, the Milky Way, but she had such an awesome personality. And then, when we were in the room, we just listened to her. She was just extraordinary, presence, a force of nature.
But I think what I was thinking about when I said, oh, for God's sakes, you fulfilled her art.
Well, yeah.
You fulfilled her yearnings to express herself through art. And one of the things I like about the picture too is that the sense that the piano music that's used for Bach and Beethoven, I think Haydn too.
Yeah.
And it's like an internal emotional continuity without language, without words, I should say.
Yes.
And it's really her soul that carries it through. Particularly in the scene when he realizes when he's looking at the footage and he sees Benny and her.
Right, exactly. Well, that was the Adagio, that was Bach's Adagio, and that's what she used to always play. Every piece of piano music in the film is what my mom loved to play. We backed everything into her choices, so she made all those choices for me. And I had recordings of my mom playing over the years, and we used those recordings. We didn't use them in the film, but we recreated them with Jennifer with the Los Angeles Philharmonic under John Williams was conducting her. She performed all the pieces. But it was kind of interesting and really sad in order to shoot these scenes, and every single day to come to the set and hear my mom's piano music, and to realize that I was going to have to go back to my home videos to be able to watch her play. I couldn't really experience her playing anymore. She would play for all the customers at the restaurant every single day. And so the music was essential to message her character, to keep her presence going.
And I think that works beautifully. And as I said, particularly because it's interwoven at the moment when he realizes that he sees it through cinema, by the way, through moving images, he understands what's happening, and which leads to showing her the scene in the closet, which leads to the great line where he says, "I won't tell."
Exactly. That was a hard day. That was a very, very hard day because it was all, obviously it's all done in sections and pieces, and it all had to be edited by, Sarah Burchard, Mike Hahn. We had to edit the whole thing for it to make total sense because I shot it sort of so piecemeal. I knew everything was going eventually, but I did a lot of shooting on that scene. And we kept playing the music because we back everything into the music. Where the music gets a little bit serious, the images start to become more relevant to Sammy. He starts to, as a kind of, life detective, he starts to see something, a fissure forming that he never saw with his eyes. Because when I actually made all these movies and showed them to my mom, I didn't realize, I just thought that Bernie was her best friend. And so nothing occurred to me and nothing got through my naked eye. The truth for me was what I saw on film, not what I saw through my eyes, which is kind of bizarre. And the business all of us are in, where the truth is on the
truth is on the film.
Is on the film.
Yeah.
It's kind of wonky.
Yeah.
But it's what happened, and in real life, I had to show her the film in the closet. I actually, in the real experience, I showed my mom the film. I sat with her in the closet in Arizona, very bright during the day. Closet's the only dark place. And I shared a closet with my sister. There were 2 sliding doors between both bedrooms. That's why it's so big. Closets aren't usually that big, especially in suburbia. But when I showed the film, I had to actually run and slow it down for her, and that was something I wasn't willing to put on film the way it actually happened. And also Michelle Williams really knew how to, when she said, "Don't show me anything." She said, "Let me do this from my imagination. I know enough about Mitzi. You don't have to actually put the film on the wall for me to watch it." So what we did was, I took the film I was going to show to her on the wall, and Janusz Kaminski, the DP, turned the projector around and projected it onto her face, so that modulation of light and color is actually the film hitting her, and we had to throw it out of focus so there'd be no images on her.
That's great. That's great, because that's quite beautiful how it all comes together. I mean, it comes to what comes to mind there is, the uncle, Judd Hirsch, when he says, art tears the family apart.
Right.
A hunger that can't be satisfied,
That's right.
which is true.
You'd be an orphan in the desert, that gypsy.
Yeah. The loneliness of it, in a way. And it's weird when you make movies, there's like 200 people around you, but you're alone.
Yeah, we all, this one knows that, we all know what that feels like. And we're alone only in that nobody can really get into our heads.
Yeah, sure.
And there's not a, there's not a conference happening in your head that everybody can zoom into and figure out what you're thinking and what you're intending. Most of the time, I really don't know, unless it's a big, huge adventure, special effects, science fi movie where everything's storyboarded. I mean, for Fableman's, nothing was storyboarded at all. No. But unless something like that has happened, we invite everyone. All the collaborators have to know what you're thinking. But on something like this, I'm making it up as I go along, and I don't know what I'm going to do next. I've been on sets with Marty. And Marty doesn't have even a piece of paper in his hand. It's a shot list. And Adam Sumner walks, the AD we share an AD, Adam Sumner, we love him. And Adam walks over to Marty and he says, well, what's the next setup? Marty says, leave me alone, I'm thinking. Come back in 5 minutes.
Oh my God.
Well, I give him some stuff. I give him we're going to track from here to here, we're going to go from this to thing. But then he speaks so fast and he's got such an accent that I don't really understand what he's saying.
I know, like you.
I don't talk like fast. I just say, after a while, I just say yes.
We met in 1966.
Yeah. Wow.
And so this is my oldest friend in terms of, I met Marty before George.
Yeah.
And Marty has only talked faster as you got.
I tried to slow it down. I tried.
He's not slowing down. That's the point.
No. I've done just sometimes like stuff in front of a camera, but trying to calm it. Let me get it across. But it gets exciting. Sometimes you talk so fast, you've already said it. Doesn't matter speaking it. The other thing that I find fascinating is the way you, and I like very much Dano with the father. And it's not done as a criticism, but he does have there's a conflict between, I think, where he talks about something real as opposed to the imagination.
Yes.
And we know that the imagination is real.
Yes.
You see, but it's not saying that he's wrong, but we see that he is that way, and he can't make that leap. He can't make the leap for her.
I wanted to kind of establish his character the first time he opens his mouth. So the first thing he says at the beginning of the film, he was standing outside in real life, it was Philadelphia. I saw the film at the theater in Philadelphia in 1952, the greatest show on earth. We had to wait hours in line in the freezing cold of winter. But I wanted Paul to come out and try to explain scientifically, technically, how the brain perceives motion, how the brain tricks us into thinking the still frames are actually moving in our heads. And that's sort of who my dad was. But my dad also was always in denial of what a great imagination he had, because he read all the science fiction.
Exactly.
He loved to read amazing stories and analog magazine. So he had a tremendous imagination, but he was terrified for our well-being. So he wanted me to go to school to be a teacher.
Yep.
And it was like, he'd always call my filmmaking a hobby. He didn't say it, to get me not to be an amateur movie maker. He just wanted me to take the kind of courses in high school that would lead to a degree that could lead to a job.
Exactly.
Because to him, growing up in Cynthiana, Kentucky, being part of the greatest generation serving in World War II, he couldn't imagine that any of us would ever get into Hollywood. He couldn't imagine that.
My family's my father went eventually, my mother and father eventually with the when they realized I couldn't really do much with the asthma and all this sort of stuff, and I couldn't be part of that neighborhood that I was in, thankfully, many different ways. I couldn't follow through with the religious vocation, any of that. They said, become a teacher. Just go and get something to fall back on, become a teacher. And then films, actually I overheard them one night, because it was only 3 rooms we were in the tenement downtown. I heard my mother saying, I think he's crazy. There's something really wrong with him.
I think the payoff to all this was when my dad came to the premiere of Jaws in 1975 in Los Angeles, and he walked out of the screen, he came over to me, and he just said a couple of words to me, I'll never forget it. He said, "Gee, Steve, this is really neat."
That was.
He wasn't even talking about the movie, he was talking about
The whole
the whole thing, the whole gig, the gig.
You bet. But he's great, the character, because when you're driving, I think she's driving to California, and she has to get out of the car?
Yep.
He tells the kid, just let her, give her time.
Give her time, yeah. Bert in our movie adores Mitzi. I mean, he loves Mitzi. And my dad in real life, after my mom left my dad, although my dad told us he was leaving her, which he did to protect her because he knew my sisters would move back in with her back in Phoenix, and he didn't want to make it appear as if it was my mom's idea, so he fell on the sword. And I didn't know this for 20 years, but he fell on the sword. And but he loved her. And there's a last line he says in the film that we had to put in there because it presages what really happened in real life, where he says, this is not the end of the story. We haven't said the end yet.
Right.
So he said that to Sammy. And because the amazing thing was that after Bernie, who my mom married, my mom was, by the way, married longer to my dad's business partner than she had ever been to my dad.
Wow.
And when he passed away, my mom and my dad was married to, this is interesting, our Uncle Benny in the film, his name was Bernie, not Benny. And Bernie was, like Seth, was a real cut-up. And we loved it, we just adored him. But at the end of sort of the whole life, when he was gone, my dad married a woman named Bernice. So that's weird.
That's funny.
Bernie, and then he went to Bernice and married Bernice.
That's funny.
But my dad and Bernice and my mom became the closest friends. I mean, they came to every event, the 3 of them together, every single Thanksgiving with us, every single bat and bar mitzvah for the kids. They were there for everything. So in a way, my dad's dream came true.
Wow, I mean, he really tries, especially when he tells Sam, he says, "You're gonna make the camping film." And he said, "Well, I can't. I'm shooting something else." "No, you gotta do this for her. It's the only way he knows how to reach her."
Right,
You know?
They're all using me.
Yeah, I know. You gotta do this for her, for me.
Yeah.
Come on, Which then leads to the divorce scene, which, you can see that he's covering.
That was obviously, because a lot of the films I've directed, there's a lot of highly charged tension, action, cinema, obviously, but a kind of what I would call drama between characters. I don't do a lot of that. I don't do a lot of that kind of head-to-head. I mean, you are a master of that. When you look at Raging Bull and you look at especially Goodfellas, I'm sure sometimes they get out of hand. You want to duck behind a table based on what's happening in front of you.
I have. There are a couple of times I didn't even see what was going on. I just heard through the earphones. Duck. You're kidding.
So I could relate to that. It's happened a couple of times with me, but that divorce scene was
That's one
the
of them.
equivalent of that.
Yeah, and that really comes across. Because it's accusing, breaking up 4 kids in the film.
Yeah.
Jesus.
But it happens to all of us, and at least half of us it happens to. And that's the whole thing. I thought I was making a movie about my family, and all the people I've talked to who have since seen the film, they tell me what they think of the movie, and then they immediately tell me about similarities that happen
Yes,
to them, which
yeah,
is kind of
yeah.
astonishing. I didn't
Yeah.
realize how many similar, from the
Yeah.
bullying, anti-Semitism, the
Yeah,
divorce,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
There's so much that we all have in common.
Yeah, no, it's a different experience for me because you know, my whole thing was from almost like a small Sicilian village downtown, down in Mulberry and Elizabeth Street now. It's very different, of course, but what I mean by that is that the mores, if there were any, were medieval, but I don't use it as a criticism. It's just who they are. They were dirt poor peasants that came over, and they stayed that way until my mother and father generation. They still had that in them, and I was raised by them, so I had all that. So there was no divorce, ever.
Right.
Ever. Whatever happens, there's no divorce. And it was, you know, I mean, we didn't, people divorce, that was a major, it's an American thing, you know? We had to learn to become American, so it was a very different experience that way. That's why the whole idea that you can make a film was something alien to that area downtown. First of all, you couldn't bring cameras into that neighborhood
Right.
until maybe mid-70s, if you paid the right people. But that's all it is, I mean, quite honestly. But, so the thing about the filmmaking is we were too poor to have a camera, so I would draw pictures, but I would draw like storyboards. They turned out to be storyboards.
Yeah.
But when you were able to get a camera, and that joy of the Lionel trains, were they Lionel?
Lionel,
Oh,
yeah.
that's beautiful, yeah. You know,
Yeah.
to make the train crash, and greatest show on earth. The impact of that film, I saw it when I was 10 years old,
Right.
1952.
You saw it at the same time, 52.
Yeah, yeah. The impact of that sequence is still to this day. Even you could even tell. You were talking about that it's you could see the artifice of it, but the artifice makes it work.
Yeah, it does. You could tell they're models. You could tell the smoke is not in scale, and it's a painted backdrop. But it doesn't matter, you know. When I was shooting the scene with Mateo, who played the young Sammy, we shot in like one of those big LA movie palaces from the 1930s, and Mateo was sitting in the third row, and I didn't want him to see the train crash until I had a close-up of him. So I started with the close-up or the medium shot of him, because I did a choker, which was done later, about 3 weeks later. But the medium shot I shot there at the theater, and I showed about 5 or 6 minutes of the movie leading up to that scene just to get Mateo's reaction. And that was the purity of his reaction.
Yeah.
Even though, you know, so much more real than The Greatest Show on Earth, he had suspended his disbelief as a 6-year-old kid. And
Yeah.
his mouth fell open and his eyes got really wide. And
Yeah.
that's all real stuff.
That's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Imagine like the Mill films when you were a kid. The Mill films. I think the first one I saw was Unconquered with Gary Cooper,
Oh, yeah,
Gardner,
yeah.
and then Samson and Delilah. You know,
I saw that too. Yes, I saw that too.
there's something about the impact of like paintings from the 19th century or something that are up there. Wild.
I'm glad I didn't see that film first, because then I would have had to knock down half my house.
Yeah.
And kill that and film here.
You were gonna do it. Well, she says Delilah when they cut the nails.
That's right.
Right,
She
you
said,
know,
that's right. She said, you know, get off me,
Yeah.
Delilah.
But the thing about the visuals in the picture are terrific because I love it. She goes after a tornado, for God's sake.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Wow.
A tornado in New Jersey, when did that
In New
happen?
Jersey, leave it alone. Don't go there. Stay in the cellar. Don't go there. No, she gets in the car, goes there, and then she realizes what she's chasing. She knows she can't reach any of that. And she has this great shot that you do with just her head through the steering wheel. And then you see her hand come up and the wedding ring is there. Right in the forward. Without being too obvious with it. It's quite strong. And later too, when she gets that cryptic kind of phone call at night, the phone is in the foreground, right?
Right.
She gets up, she answers her mother's voice, for
Right.
God's sakes. And then he gets up, he puts the phone down, and as they both start to put their heads back on the pillow, there's two eyes.
He notices.
He's
I'm so happy right now. This is so great. You hear the commercial, it's amazing.
It's like sitting there looking, and then, I don't know, next thing you know, this maniac arrives, and he gets him crazy.
Uncle Boris was a real character, yeah.
Really?
And yeah, and I'll tell you something, because I've mentioned this a couple of times, and when I showed the film to my sisters, you know, and they had their own personal rather traumatic reaction to it, because we had just lost Dad 2 years ago, at 103 and a half, by the way. Had great longevity. My mom passed away 4.5 years ago at 97, so she had a great life. But when they saw the film, they said, oh my God, nobody's going to believe the phone call scene. Why did you put that? They had read the script, and they forgot they read the script. And they said, you shouldn't put that in the film because it's true, and nobody will believe that she got a phone call from her dead mother. But what happened was that we came to breakfast the next morning, and something had happened that night, and my dad and my mom were excited, and my mom said the phone rang, and my dad said, I never heard it ring. And my mom said, it rang, and I picked it up, and it was Mama on the phone saying, don't let him in, he's coming tomorrow, I'm scared, Dolly, I'm scared. And my dad said, well, she did say that, I heard her talking, but when I picked up the phone, there was nobody there. And she said, I swear. And that's exactly what happened. So that was breakfast, and it was summer, so we didn't have school. And that night, we were a family that sat down together for dinner. That night at dinner, we're having dinner, just like in the movie, and a taxi pulls up, and the guy gets out of the car, and Uncle Boris, and my mother said, oh my God, because this guy terrified my grandmother, and terrified my mother, because he was a circus performer for the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, and he worked with the elephants and the lions. So what he says in that scene, Tony and I pretty much made up, because after dinner he just went to bed. He didn't say a word to me. He made that up. But that was the nature of his personality.
Oh, that's wonderful. When he talks about the old joke, what, and quit show business, he's right. We have to shovel a lot of
elephant manure. We do. If you want to join the big top.
Yeah, that's it. But I didn't realize so much in terms of the when you went to Los Angeles, the school, the anti-Semitism in the school.
That was Northern California.
Northern California. No, I had a different experience when you told me there was a small Jewish community in Phoenix.
Yeah, that was what we were part of a Jewish community in Phoenix, but I went to school with very few Jewish kids, elementary school, but I had there was no problems in Arizona, none. It only happened in Northern California, where everybody was upwardly mobile, and everybody was making way, way, way beyond the minimum wage.
It's just the opposite for us down here, because we were, with the Italian area, there was a divide. The divide was Skid Row, which now is very classy, it's the Bowery. The rest was the Jewish community, so everybody was mixed together. It was very, very much, it was like, what? What's the problem? So it was a surprise when you told me in Phoenix that it was a very small group, and I understood something completely different.
Right, because in Phoenix, the minority in Phoenix were Native American kids. So I went to school with Navajo kids and Hopi kids from the Hopi tribe and Navajo tribe, and then some Hispanic, not many, and zero black kids in my elementary schools in Arizona. Zero.
Yeah. No, that's very exotic for us here. Exotic to me was Irish kids. I met them in Cardinal Hayes High School. They were Irish. Believe them. The only Irish we knew was from Raoul Walsh and John Ford, you know. But it's a very different experience, and in a way, you told me the story about that kid.
I did. I told you that story.
Yeah, I'm glad you did it in the film.
Yeah, he was killed in Vietnam a number of years later. He was killed in action in Vietnam. Wow. Yeah. He called me up. I never spoke to him again after that incident that happened after the prom. That actually happened, except we had, Tony and I thought we needed to extend this scene a little bit longer, because I never understood why he came over to me and said, why did you make me look that way? Why did you make me look like that? That he burst into tears. This 6'4" quarterback, the sort of the star of the senior class, and he had this huge emotional reaction, and I never saw him again. And then a number of years later, Duel came on ABC on television, and the next day I get a call from this guy at my office, and my assistant says, "Do you know?" I'm never going to say his name, but you know it. And my blood went cold, just ran cold. It was like PTSD. And I heard the name and I couldn't believe. I thought my life is over. He's coming after me. My life is over. And he wanted to know, because my name had an N on it. Everybody in those days knew me as Steve, so you call me Steve. And Francis, George, Brian, and Paul. We all, you're Marty, I'm Steve. Steve, the N was only added after that was what, instead of the credits. So he didn't know if Steve and Stephen were the same guy. And once he found out that I was the same guy he went to high school with, we never talked about what happened. He just said he liked the thing with the truck. And he couldn't believe I was actually a movie director, a TV director. And then he said, I said, what are you doing now? He says, oh, I'm a cop up here in Northern California. I'm a police officer.
Yeah. Sad and shocking, the whole sequence, it really is.
Yeah.
Something I didn't quite know until learning about it years later in that way. But you also, when you do the war film, Escape to Nowhere,
Right.
and you cover it there to a certain extent, there's something there that's really interesting, but when you're directing the actor, Sandy's directing the actor, I think it kind of sums up a lot about the film to me, where you tell him, this is your family, and you're done. You're done, and you can't save them.
Right, exactly.
You can't, and you can't save that family.
No, he's
What's going to
talking-
happen
yeah,
with the divorce? It's not going to happen.
He's talking to himself.
Yeah, exactly.
The kid just happens to be in the way of a monologue about what is he going to do with this actionable information that he's just discovered on his little Mansfield 8mm movie editing machine.
But the kid plays it. The actor, he plays it in the scene at the end when he's walking through the.
And the camera's on his back. Only I see his face.
Yeah.
The kid does it. 8mm on his back. Nobody sees he got emotional. Only I show that.
Poor guy.
I got to show that.
Poor guy. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. But it's very moving, and as I say, for me, the character, the bond between Mitzi and Sammy is something that is just incalculable.
Thank you.
And as I say, in a way, you fulfilled it,
Yeah, well, I was just hoping to, it's interesting because I've been very private about my private life, obviously, and I've never gone public with my private life until now. And I think that in a sense, COVID gave me the chance to really think about it. And I think when I lost my mom, I started really taking the story seriously, like I said before. And then when I lost my dad, Tony and I had written the script, and I really didn't have an intention to make it. I wanted this as a document, as a screenplay document. I was going to be very happy to put it in a drawer somewhere. And then after Dad left us, and COVID gave me so much time to think about, and especially when COVID was really bad in 2020.
Yeah.
And we were losing, I think, by the time we lost 500,000 Americans, let alone the millions around the world who would succumb to the first Delta COVID variant, I kept thinking, is this really a foregone conclusion that this is going to be a pandemic, almost a life ending or a, and what do they call that, what do they call that, an epic level event, what killed the dinosaurs in a sense. I didn't know, but the one thing I thought about was, if I had to make one more movie, if I had to take one more story,
Yeah.
what would that story be? And that's why I decided to put this into production.
Oh, it's wonderful.
I didn't know.
It was an extraordinary time, I'm sure for everybody too, that shutdown was suddenly, you're not sure if you're gonna have one more breath, And then what's valuable to you, and begins with the people closest to you, and then what kind of work you're doing, if it is, I hate to use the word work, but the creative stuff that you're doing, all of a sudden everything just shifted. It was almost a relief, in a way, for the clarity to hit, so it was a remarkable, even if it wasn't the total extinction, it could have been as bad as the 14th century.
Right,
Millions died,
right. Right. Did you like David Lynch?
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
All the pictures, look at the guy, where's the goddamn horizon? Please, you want to be an artist, where's the god? He's absolutely right. So tell the film quickly, how did you do it with David? How did you direct that?
Well, it was just, it was my idea. It was another actor I was thinking about. I hadn't called him yet, thank goodness, but another actor who I know personally, I was thinking about asking if he could stand in for John Ford. And then Tony Kushner's husband, Mark Harris, when he heard where I was about to make a phone call with this actor friend of mine, he said, "Have you ever thought of David Lynch to play?" And the light bulb went off. It was an incredible masterstroke of an idea from Mark Harris. So I called David immediately, who I know just a little bit, and David was really flattered to be offered, but said no. He wasn't an actor, and he had other projects he wanted to pursue. And he didn't want to play John Ford because John Ford's such a great man, and what if he didn't, come up to those standards? And he just was kind of shy about that. But the one thing that we could relate to, which I think opened the door a little wider, was the fact that through David Lynch's foundation, my wife and I got very involved in TM as a way of relaxing. And so we had been 3 years into the whole TM world, and David found out on that phone call that I was involved in that. Bob Ross was our tutor, and he suddenly leaned. I could tell he was leaning forward a bit more on the call, but he still said no. And so I went to my go-to person, Laura Dern, his best friend. I said, "Laura, help! I need you. I need you now more now than ever before. You got to talk David into doing this. David's promised he'll give you his final answer in 2 weeks. We made a deal on the phone. David, can I call you in 2 weeks? And you can tell me no, and I won't bother you again." He said, "Yeah, call me in 2 weeks." I said, "You got 2 weeks to talk him into this." I called him 2 weeks later, and he answers the phone. He says, "Look, I've decided that I'm going to do this under one condition." So what's that? "I want to get the costume 2 weeks ahead of time, to live in it for 2 weeks. I want to break down the costume." And I said, "You mean you're going to wear it?" He says, "Every day. I'm going to come every day. The patch, the hat, everything else, send to me." And he showed up that day in a pretty ratty costume. But it was the way John Ford was.
I didn't recognize him at all.
That scene happened to be. I mean, that was the first and last time in real life I met John Ford.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
But I didn't recognize him at all until, and the time he takes to light that cigar.
Yeah.
A long time. And that's one of the things that we all know about. That's the magic of film editing. You make anything last as long as you want.
I guess that's it. They're telling us, huh? Okay.
But I will be back. I will be back here in New York City at the Directors Guild, same time next year, interviewing this guy for Killers of the Flower Moon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mike.
No. Did you get any good?